Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Jeannie Allen, founder and CEO of the Center for Education Reform. CER is a proud sponsor of ASU+GSV again this year, and inspired in part by the amazing connections we have made over time at this summit. We've made a deliberate shift to focus on learners at all levels. Excuse the hard line back in the background of my phone. And focus on innovation opportunity, which brings us to ASU+GSV here, and a focus on educational outcomes. We're excited to bring together this incredible panel to address an urgent need for education opportunity during COVID-19. The discussion today could not be more timely since New York City abruptly closed 124 schools this week. Boston delayed their opening, and yesterday the South Carolina Supreme Court blocked coronavirus and grants to families who can't afford to move their children to private schools. So to lead us in this discussion, and welcome to all of you, is our good friend and a valued colleague in the space, Chris Stewart, aka Citizen Stewart, education activist and CEO of Brightbeam Network, co-host of 8 Black Hands podcast, and he'll be moderating for us. Please keep your eyes peeled on Q&A. We'll be taking them throughout the short time we have together, and look forward to engaging with you shortly after. Chris, come on the screen.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. I appreciate you. So we should get started. We can have our guest all come online and also come into view and unmute if you can. For those of you watching today, we have a great panel, an esteemed panel. There's an old quote about, I don't trust any organization that allows me as a member, but this panel is different than that. I do care about this panel. This is exactly who I would want to assemble when we talk about things like what we do to increase educational opportunity during a national crisis, a national pandemic. In the group, we have the Honorable Jim Blue, who is Assistant Secretary for Planning, Evaluation, and Development at the United States Department of Education. So I was about to put you back at a university, Jim, but no, at the United States Department of Education. We also have the Honorable Rob Bryant, who's a state senator with the great state of North Carolina, also happens to be on the Higher Ed Education Committee there in that state. We have Adriana Marietta, who is from the Farrell's Foundation in Arizona, and we have Ellen Weaver, who is the president and CEO of Palmetto Promise Institute in the great state of South Carolina. So welcome, everybody. Hope everybody is ready to have a very informative discussion. I'd love to start with you, Jim Blue, because I think right now it's apparent to all of us, families, my own included, are struggling with what we do in a very unstable time, uncertain time, with making sure that we keep the promise alive for our kids. Childhood has no rewind. Just because we're in the middle of a pandemic doesn't mean that we can afford to have any time off of pushing our kids forward and learning and making sure that they get the best. And we have so many diverse needs in the country. When we talk about the work of making sure that education stays on track, from your long view, from your view at the top and seeing what we have to do nationally, what really is the work of making sure that every kid gets an education during a very tough time like this?
Thanks, Citizen. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
I have to say, I'm really delighted to be here today. I hated that you described us as coming from the top. I think most of you know I was in the field for years working on this issue, and I still believe that's where the real work gets done. And so we try and be helpful at the department under Betsy DeVos, but at the end of the day, it's the work that the people on this call are doing, and I'm much more eager to listen to folks today, and particularly about South Carolina, Ellen, after yesterday's decision. But I can say we're shouting and raising alarms everywhere right now. I loved your phrase that you can't rewind childhood. We have a system that has failed to serve way too many families. And guess what? They happen to be the most disadvantaged children in our society, where we're seeing the most failure. That's worse than that, because the system has been built in a way that we don't know how to recover when we've lost a year of learning. We don't have the models in place. We have some people who've been experimenting, particularly in the private sector and the charter school sector. But on the whole, we absolutely don't know how we're going to recover from what appears to be a year's loss of learning. We've had a couple of people do projections on what that means for individuals, and you're losing more than a year of salary over the course of your lifetime. To be very conservative about it, and it could be much higher than that. And we're also, when you look at it collectively, the impact on our society, you know, there are two ways to worry about this. One is we are aggravating the inequities in our society because of what's happening. So that's number one. And then just from a pure economic point of view, Rick Hanashek out of Stanford, who assumed only a third of a year loss, was able to generate numbers, $14 trillion present value of lost economic productivity. So we're trying to say, like, this is serious. We need to do something about it. You know our point of view on that. We believe the way to do that is to empower families to choose the setting they think is best for their child. With that, I'll let others talk.
What's so interesting about that, empower families to do what they need to do for their children should not be controversial at all. There should be no problem with that statement. That statement is powerful and it's right on the money. But I'm going to shift to Ellen, who, you know, you can tell me why that a statement that seems so commonsensical to the rest of us faces political challenge, and what is the challenge on the landscape of, you know, school choice and empowering families that you see from your local area?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, coming to you from the great state of South Carolina, I wish we had better news on behalf of the children of our state, many of whom have been left behind in what is often ranked the worst, or, you know, next to worst education system in the country. You know, 2/3 of our kids aren't reading at grade level at the end of 3rd grade. It's a travesty. It's an injustice. And so while the Supreme Court's decision yesterday was not necessarily unexpected just because of the politics of the court, it is very disappointing. I like to tell people who get into this work, when the power and money of the system is at stake, you know the empire is always going to strike back. And so Governor McMaster went big and he went bold, as have several other governors, I think in Oklahoma, New Hampshire, Florida, in terms of being bold and visionary in how they use the discretionary funds that they received under the CARES Act. And I think if there's any silver lining coming out of the case here in South Carolina, it's that the court did very narrowly construe it to issues under the South Carolina Constitution. So this is not impacting the decisions that those governors in other states have made. And, you know, while I'm not a lawyer, I don't play one on TV, I'm not going to give you a legal analysis here. The real lawyers are actually reviewing the decision right now. And I do believe that there is hope, even if it's unintentional on the part of the court, in terms of laying out a roadmap for how we continue the fight to bring more opportunities to the families and children of this state. I'll just close by telling you the demand for this program was overwhelming. We had 15,000 families in the first 3 weeks after the program was announced sign up to receive updates about how they could apply for these funds. And that was actually before we even that, you know, the bulk of public schools were not going to be opening, you know, for face-to-face education in the fall. So the demand has only increased since then. Parents are hungry. There's huge market demand. We are seeing it in every conversation we had. We were on the phone this morning with a mother who's driving 80 miles every day to get her kid to an education option that will meet their needs. And she just broke down in tears. And it's tough to have those conversations, but it reminds you why this work is so important. And it also reminds me that I think we have such a messaging moment right now to reach people who might not have heard this conversation before. It's our opportunity to expand the definition of public education to not just a system of building buses and bureaucrats, but a prepared student who can succeed in their life wherever they learn. And I think parents are more open to that message than they've ever been before. And so while, we're disappointed about what happened here in South Carolina, we're going to turn that disappointment into action.
Just if I might just follow up a little bit, I saw on Twitter, I saw a professor who tweeted out and basically celebrated the decision as a big victory and win for public education. And I had such a weird response to that because I think we lose the real face of a parent and a child and a student when we celebrate the victory over them having an option. Can you just say a little bit more about what's the material consequence for a real family in your state right now that this decision has happened? What do they not have now? What's the pathway that they don't have at this moment now?
Absolutely. Well, I think, South Carolina is a relatively poor state. I think we have the 9th highest poverty index in the country. And so we have a lot of parents who simply don't have the resources to access a private education, to pay for a tutor in a pandemic pod. And when you have 2/3 of your children who are already not reading at grade level in a good year, falling further behind, like Jim said, losing a year, an additional year of learning on top of the perhaps 2 years that they're already behind. I mean, that's just disastrous. You can't recover from that. And we're also hearing stories from parents of children with special needs, and these especially break my heart. Because there's just no way that a child with a special needs can be accommodated by an iPad. And these students are also being left behind. So I mean, the human cost of this is real.
That's so much what I think should be the focus of all of our policy making, our politics. Politics should make the lives of people better. We should not celebrate when someone loses an opportunity that could have earned them more money in their life, could have gotten them a better job, couldn't have put them in a better neighborhood. So it's weird to me that it would be politically acceptable for any group of people to celebrate that. But I want to go to you, the Honorable Rob Ryan, and say, help me understand the politics. Help me understand the politics of making policies that prevent people from having something rather than helping people have something more than what they have now. What's behind the scenes? If I am a complete layperson to politics, what goes on there?
Well, thanks, Chris. First, maybe I'll start with, I love the title because when you think about seizing opportunity, I think to Ellen's point, you see some states that are seizing opportunities and trying to provide those same kind of opportunities you talked about, and others that are resting on the status quo, keeping everything closed down. I think a lot of those people are genuinely worried about the impact on kids, but they're not willing to do anything about it. Maybe for fear of teachers unions and other groups that want to keep things shut down, want to keep the status quo. And frankly, I think some of them are afraid about the opportunity that parents and families will have that are sort of coming to the forefront. I think the pandemic generally you've seen the opportunities with virtual learning, but you've also seen the need for in-person learning, as Ellen mentioned, with students with disabilities, other students that need to be in that classroom setting, need to have that interaction with the teacher daily. And, one of the things that I'm proud of over the past decade, North Carolina has worked hard to be prepared and to provide more choices. And there's a few things that highlight that that have happened in North Carolina over the past decade. We removed the cap on charter schools. We have broadband in every single school across the state. And we started 3 significant programs: our Opportunity Scholarship Program, providing lower income families with the opportunity choose the best school for their child. We have a Students with Disabilities grant program and educational savings accounts that apply to right now just for students with disabilities. But there've been a great number of programs that we've set up to try to give parents and families more opportunities. The sad reality is, even in our state, every one of those programs had wait lists, Chris. Every single one of them, and they weren't huge programs. So, I mean, we were only letting just a small fraction of families get those choices, and they all had wait lists. One of the exciting things for us, we had a governor who would not make any moves to challenge that status quo, but our legislature did, and we took the COVID funding that we had available, and in our Opportunity Scholarship program, we actually increased the income levels, so that, because the reality, as Ellen said, for middle and lower income families, a lot of people, they have that zip code inequity, right? They can't, if their school is not working for them, and the school doesn't have to be terrible. If the school could be ranked an A, if your kid's getting an F, you think it's an F school, right? It doesn't work for you. And so, it's letting those parents make those choices. And so by increasing that level, the families that really had no opportunity to either move or get into a private school, there's a greater number of families that have opportunities. And certainly for our students with disabilities, we pulled both those wait lists for both the ESAs and the grants. And just to give a highlight story in my own county, Mecklenburg, it's a big school district, and people are well intentioned. I get it, but it's a big district trying to do one size fits all on just tons and tons of kids, and it doesn't work. And when they came out with their plan, which is basically just to keep everybody home or to keep everybody online, parents just immediately went crazy or so frustrated. They're like, this isn't going to work for my child. Families were both working parents were like, how am I going to do this? The private schools in Charlotte Mecklenburg, every one of them, I think, pretty much prior to COVID had some available spaces. Within like 2 days of the plan announcement, every single one of them was full. Charter schools that had that were at least going in person also immediately, any of those slots where kids were able to get in with their teachers, have a more robust educational environment, were full. And there were 5 parents that actually sued in Mecklenburg County over the plan, saying we have a constitutional obligation, a constitutional right to an education that works for our child, and you're not providing that. And that case is still ongoing. But again, I think the sad reality, even as prepared as I feel like we were with all the work we've done, there is so much more opportunity to provide families with great choices. And I think, we build up systems in education, and a lot of times it's very hard to get people to say, hey, let's rethink this. Let's do this differently. We can do better for our parents. I hope we'll see more of that, because I think there are a world of different type schools and opportunities. We just got to give parents and families access.
I think we argue nationally a lot about school choice and about parental choice and about how much empowered parents should be. But when it comes down to it, the argument is settled by the fact that you have waiting lists. The argument is settled by the fact that whenever you open up these pathways to opportunities, they fill up and glut with people who want that opportunity, and we make them scarce. We artificially make those opportunities scarce. I see a waiting list as it's an opportunity embargo. It's an embargo, a man-made embargo on opportunity. And it's very un-American to me, just to be very real with you. I can't think of anything more un-American than an embargo on opportunity, but somehow it persists and it's still politically viable for a certain set of political actors. I don't know if I got all out of you, Senator Bryan, about the back room on how that works, but we're going to come back to that one point. I want to go to Adriana, just because your state challenges something that I have thought about. When we define equity and we think about equity and school choice programs, the group of people that we put into what we consider to be the constituency for the equity argument is actually fairly narrow and small. And in Arizona, you have a wider group of people who fit within the choice matrix. You have middle income people who are in charter schools. You have more middle income people who are participating in choice programs, and they fit within the equity constituency. And I think nationally, it looks to me like a model. We should actually nationally be saying, no, equity means all of you. It means a greater group of people can benefit from these programs. What would be wrong with saying that, with using Arizona as the model for making sure that everybody sees that this is for them?
Yeah, when people look at Arizona, one is the grass is always greener on the other side,
It
right?
sure is. Looking from Minnesota, it sure is.
Well, and around here, I'll tell you, right? We people see our school choice movement, and I mean, we rank 48, 49 overall in education when you compare us to all the other states, but it's school choice wise, parents have a choice. Now, this hasn't completely reached the low income communities, and I want to make sure that we're clear of that, right? So we can still count on one hand the high performing schools that are working with low income students across Arizona. But one thing that is really amazing is that parents in the state of Arizona are very much aware of choice, regardless of where they stand politically. We all know that we have choice. So I would say that when COVID hit, in the moment of panic, when schools didn't know what was going on, and clearly parents, we were trying to figure out what was happening, parents began to put demands on the system. Well, how is the system going to work for me, right? How are you going to help us? And one thing that the Faros Foundation, and that we take pride in, is we like to listen to parents, and we feel that's a voice that's left out of this conversation, and therefore the urgency, it just isn't there. If parents are left out of this, then we lose a really valuable voice. So we went to parents, we worked with a local nonprofit who did town hall meetings across the state, rural communities, urban settings, and asked parents, what do you need right now to support your student in this uncertain time? Now, this was back in May, but we didn't know when schools were going to go back to normal. Now, what we learned from those families, what they needed was very different than what we had anticipated. Some schools in Arizona have returned to the classroom, given the pressure that a lot of families have put on the system, but also a lot of families sort of are not comfortable. And that's sort of where we said, okay, well, let us work with you to see how creative we can be. Micro schools is one of the things that have stemmed from this. Parents in their block or with friends sort of bring kids together, hire someone to create a curriculum, but also programs to teach parents how to support their student at home. We have a couple of programs. One is actually, there's one through ASU, and it's an community educator program where anyone from the community who wants to support a student can receive a credential. And so you can create a school at your house and your community center. I mean, that is creativity, and it's the same. And there's a similar program just that mostly focuses on parents in supporting them through this program. Regardless of how sophisticated and how much access you have to resources, it is still really challenging to educate a first grader or a second grader. Also, districts have been somewhat creative. The Phoenix Union High School District does have a reputation for being a little more cutting edge. It's the biggest high school district in the state of Arizona. They created PHU City, which is a digital high school. It spans across the city, and high school kids can go to a cafeteria, they can go anywhere they want, but they are connected to a high school. So if they wanted to play football, they still can go and participate. But all of these things have come from the pressure that the parents have put on the system, right? Mm-hmm. We live in a state where parents know that if this school isn't working, I can drive a mile or two and there will be one that will be a better fit. So we can begin to see what happens when parents understand the power that they have, is that the system has to, in a way, adapt.
I think that's huge, what you just said too, that parents are driving the system to be innovative, because I think that is something that we can nationalize, or we should nationalize, is that, parents should be leading from the front. They should not be leading from the back when it comes to these decisions. They should be at the front of these pathways. But what I want to throw out to all of you together is about how we think bigger in the moment about getting funds directly into the hands and resources directly into the hands where they matter most, which are the parents, the deciders in chief of their households, the presidents of the education of the kids in their homes, because I see that we're not all the same. My family's not the same as yours. We have different needs and different thoughts. There's a big push to just reopen all the schools and go back to what we had to before. In some ways, I understand that. I understand the business of that. I understand the need of it, but it's not what all families want or need right now. And it could be a good time for micro schools, for pods, for homeschooling, for a range of educational opportunities. Our kids are so different. I have 3 upstairs right now pretending to learn, and they're not. As we speak right now, they're upstairs really pretending like they're doing something, and it's really not anything that I should be proud of. But what can we do more to get the resources directly to families and cut out the middleman so that they can decide what educational opportunities are going to be best for their kids?
I'll jump in quickly. I think that it all goes back to what Adriana said about parent power, and the parents have to know that they have that power. And I think parents have been so disempowered by the traditional system. There is so much jargon and so much condescension that the traditional system often uses in the way that it engages with parents. And so one of the things that we're doing here in South Carolina, just to kind of concretely empower parents, is through an organization called MySC Education, and we are doing virtual town halls. We've created a Facebook group where parents can essentially crowdsource questions and ideas, and of course we're moderating it so that if there are expert resources that we can point them to or things that we can explain that they don't know. We are creating advocacy toolkits to teach them how to use their voice to talk to their lawmakers, because I think Adriana hit the nail on the head. Market demand is going to drive political change, and that's the only way that we will ever convince lawmakers, all due respect, Senator Bryan, who is on the cutting edge of this, to do the right thing.
I mean, Senator Bryan, what when we get these toolkits to parents and we have them advocating for themselves, what do you want them to show up and be saying to your colleagues? Like, what's the best thing for them to be putting pressure on your colleagues to do right now?
I think personal stories are always good when they see a real family and the real decisions they have to make. I mean, it's hard. Politicians are, they're running around, they're busy, and everybody can use an anecdote to their advantage, right? One story in one situation and how moving it is, but people conveniently drop anecdotes off if they're not helpful to them, and they keep them if they're helpful to them. But I do think seeing the real stories going in, I think frankly we need more folks going into charter schools, going into some of the private schools where students are exercising the scholarships and actually seeing what's happening, talking to that parent. And I think when those parents share those stories, I mean, there's ways that videos are created and different, messaging, no doubt. The traditional public environment has plenty of its own marketing by way of either teachers unions or associations. And, parents need to really, and organizations like Ellen was talking about, have to work to get real stories out there and actually show and particularly how impactful they can be to families that really do not have a choice otherwise. I mean, for someone, if they've got tons of money or they live in the right zip code, for one, they're not either worried about it because their kid's school, they think their kid's school is fine, or they can pick up and move, or pick up and pay the money and get the tutor, or get whatever help they need. And then even if they're frustrated, they kind of move on with life. It's the families that are who feel like they really have no voice, who are looking at their kid knowing, I always say, nobody knows, just like you said, Chris, about your kids upstairs, nobody knows better how your kid's doing, whether or not their needs are being met at school, and their education is happening for them than you. And so I think conveying those stories, we did start something which didn't make it very far, an education sort of finance reform task force, trying to talk about how trying to get to a point where we get dollars following kids. I mean, part of the reality, even with our opportunity scholarship, is we're only paying $4,200 for that kid that hops out to a private school, which usually means other funds, by the nonprofit school or whatever, being raised to kind of help cover that. And frankly, it's not near what we're paying from a federal, state, local dollars, maybe paying $11,000-$12,000 per child or whatever, and only $4,200 is getting to the kid in that situation. So I think looking at any efforts we can make to really help people track students and where those dollars are.
Chris, do you mind if I weigh in here, or do you want to move on?
I absolutely don't mind if you weigh in. Of course I don't. Let's hear from you.
Okay. Look, I think a big part of this is mindset. And it's true that in Arizona, they feel much more empowered, and they put pressure on their traditional system to behave in a way that I think people are envious of around the country. But part of it goes to a question that's up in the queue. And for reformers, when we see a question that starts with, this is public money, it should be spent on public schools, for us, that's a very tired argument. I do want to address it, but it's because the mindset around what public education is has been dominated by the government schools. And we have to separate those. What public education was a promise to fund the education publicly of every child in this country, and to do it at a high quality. And the solution became this factory model government-run school. And there were 1,000 other ways, but at least one major way where we could have satisfied the desire to educate every child in this country. And what most reformers believe is that the way you do that is you empower families to choose what they think is best, and it not necessarily has to be a government school, that there are lots of other ways to provide education. And that's certainly true in the 21st century, where we have seen popping up across the country these micro schools or pandemic pods, where people realize, well, the school system has failed me here, I'm just going to do it myself. And I think there is an argument to the person who, I'm very respectful, by the way, I didn't mean to call you out on your question, but that the whole system would work better if we simply gave the money to the families so they could figure out how to do this themselves when the factory model is not working. Then you can talk about what happens after the pandemic. And I think it's healthier to have choice and competition. And I just want to point out, it's how every other sector of our economy works. This is unique in America, where the government has a monopoly over the services.
Also embedded in that question, and I think the person who gave the question is also, shouldn't we keep the resources in public schools and just reduce the class sizes, hire more teachers, do the things that the public system banks on for improving student achievement, which really is smaller class sizes, more teachers, more training, more services within schools as the safe container for the expenditure, rather than letting it bleed out into other parts of the economy. I mean, it would be so wrong with doubling down on the things that educators believe makes education better.
If
Yeah,
I
we
may.
also have a lot of evidence that those things don't work.
Woo, everybody wanted to get in on that one, but go ahead, Jim. Go ahead, Jim.
I've already talked too much, but we have a lot of evidence that, you know, smaller class size, more teachers does not work. It does not improve student achievement, and yet it costs a lot more.
And for this, I will take my foundation hat off and put my mom hat on. And I would say, if you ask me to put my child in a failing school or a school that's not serving her for the sake of serving the system, then that goes against everything that I am as a mom, right? That's where we lose the urgency. It has to be child-centric, and it has to work for the child. And you can't ask a parent to put a child in a system that has for many years tried really hard, but not too much success, to turn the corner.
I'm going to give you an anecdote from South Carolina. So our highest per pupil revenue district is over $20,000 per pupil. Our lowest per pupil district is around $10,000 per pupil. So there's a huge disparity. Interestingly, those two districts have very similar levels of poverty, and the district who has the 10,000 per pupil revenue is outperforming the district with the over 20,000 per pupil revenue. And I attribute that to leadership. Leadership is not something that money is going to buy. Leadership and culture and education matter. And so class size, more money, all of this is never, ever going to change anything. And Jim, I love what you said about just differentiation, different student needs. I came personally from a lower middle class family. We probably would have qualified for some of the scholarships that North Carolina has available right now. But instead, I mean, my parents worked multiple jobs. They sent me to a small Christian, I homeschooled, and then I graduated from a public school. And I can see how in each iteration of my education journey, I needed that different option for where I was. And so one size doesn't even fit all for the same kid, much less every child.
Yeah, Chris, I'll just throw into maybe to sort of pile on, and maybe to Jim's point that one, it just doesn't work. And what you see with school choice that's fascinating is that it does. For one, student outcomes improve. There have been all the gold standard studies, as we like to call it these days. This is science, right? The gold standard studies tell us student outcomes are better. In addition to that, the public schools get better. I mean, again, this is the science, and it's the public schools around them respond. And I think Florida is a great example where you've seen this initial sort of hostility towards scholarships. And I know there is still some, but you've also seen more folks just embrace, like, hey, we want to do the best job we can for our kids at this public school. You do a great job at that private school or that charter. And finally, to the point, it saves money. It is much less expensive. It actually gives you more money for students with special needs, for kids with, for whether you need transportation dollars or food dollars. It would actually provide more funds for the folks that really need it, and allow this to reduce some of the constant money pressure on the system.
Senator Bryan, do you have an answer for the question around how do we start making sure that the funds that we get to kids for choice is fully funded? So I just heard something about a district from Ellen that gets $24K, right? But when we talk about choice programs, it's often $5K or $6K or $7K. And that, to me, that's explicitly the state or the program saying to you, you are worth less than a child similarly situated somewhere else, which to me is immoral to say to any person in any government in any place. So do you have an idea of how we get our choice friends to be more bold about where they rate, what they write in terms of legislation to say, if per pupil income or asset is such, that's what you get?
Yeah, I mean,
I guess I'm saying selfishly, I got 3 kids upstairs. I want all the money.
Right.
I want all the money, man. I want all of it.
I get it. I have 6 kids, so I can relate.
Okay.
And and you make those choices, and you love it. I think everybody would love it. I think, again, I mentioned we started some education finance reform. Actually, getting parents a real education on how much money does actually flow, like, because every state funds differently, and so sometimes they're confused. You got localities funding, you got the state funding, you got federal funding. So where's all the money coming from? I think we would do a good job to educate our parents, and even teachers and families. I think sometimes if everybody realized, gee, we can do some of this differently, you'd find, and charters have done that to some degree, right? And there's still debates about how much of that charter money follows the child itself. But and I'll be honest, Chris, I think whenever you start out with a school choice piece of legislation, and I'm sure Alan and Adriana and others have seen this, usually you have to start with, you're starting with something, take anything you can get, and it's often something that is not as robust as you would like, doesn't help as many families as you would like, and often involves a partnership of the community and schools that you're involved with them. I mean, ideally, to your point, you wouldn't have to raise additional funds at the school to get kids there. But the reality is, based on the numbers most programs have, is that there are other funds that help, sort of fill that gap. I think part of it is just educating folks on exactly how many dollars there are for that individual child. So if you're in a Title I situation or wherever else, like tally up, what that number would be. And if all of a sudden parents realize, man, my kid has this number attached to them, if it stuck with them wherever they went, that would be pretty significant.
I mean, I would love it for the state and for everybody who's responsible in the state for children to be able to explain to parents, this is exactly what the allotment is. This is your allotment. That's why they call it per pupil income, because it's per pupil, and you have a pupil, so this is your money. I mean, I think we've been infantilized as parents to believe that that's the system's money. That's not really our money. It's not really on our head count. And we should shift, I think, a little bit. We should shift it. JP Watson had a question here for us of how we might shift that focus from it being about each kid instead of all kids. So we like to tell the story of the universal system being for all kids, which when something is for everybody, it's for nobody, right? And JP is asking us, how can we shift that focus to being about each kid? You guys have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I have 20 years of thoughts on this. Look, it's fundamentally where the debate lies. There is one special interest that keeps saying it has to be all kids. And in their effort to reach all kids, they're reaching only a portion of them. And so it is key to make the distinction. This is about making sure each and every kid in the country gets an education. Unfortunately, when you do that, when you take that stand, let's say you're Betsy DeVos and you take that stand, you are subjecting yourself to a level of vitriol and attack that we see in almost no other part of our political system. The most heated debates happen here in education. And so what you really need is a lot of people with courage to say what Chris was saying a minute ago. It's like, my child should be worth this much, give me the money, and I will be able to make a better stand with them. And I would argue in our society, and based on what we know about education, disadvantaged children, certainly special needs children, I think it's easier for people to understand that, they require more money and they should get a larger scholarship. But it should not be based on, well, you're choosing a private school, so you get 1/3 the amount of money that the traditional school gets.
Yeah, I wonder where we're going to get the political courage to have leaders that stand up and say something like, I want to be an American for every child, regardless of where they go to school, rather than people who stand up and say things like, I'm going to be for the public system, which immediately tells you that there's a portion of, it's never okay to say that there's going to be a portion of kids that you just don't care about. Children are children. They have needs everywhere they go. And I think we should get more of the money directly into the hands of families who can make good decisions about. I love what you said, Ellen. Even the same kid might need a different middle school from a high school. I know in our family, we did a traditional elementary, charter middle school, a private high school, and a Benedictine college, right? That's been my pathway. I've been a parent for 3 decades now. So that was a weird pathway. And we had to hobble it together. And I want a government that respects that. I want a government that sees us as the best informed decision makers, the deciders. We did have one more question. I think it's a question more of a comment, but it really talks around a district in Georgia. I think it's Oconee, I don't know how to say it, where private schools and public schools have a partnership together that offer opportunities to students. Do you guys see the possibility for there to be more partnerships, public-private partnerships, where we're working together? We're not always fighting, and we're not always, in the Hunger Games for money.
It's Oconee, because we have an Oconee County in South Carolina next door as well. But I think one of the areas where this could be the most impactful is when it comes to serving students with special needs. There is a really interesting organization that is in the process of launching in Charleston, South Carolina right now, called The Beautiful Gate. And it was born out of the education journey of a mom who moved to South Carolina from another state where her son had much more robust services to accommodate his special need than what she was able to find for him when they moved to South Carolina. And so these are the stories of parents that I love, just the grit and the determination that are born out of their personal pain and how they turn it into something that can empower other parents in their education journey. But I think that this is a model where, a public school could actually contract with them to better help serve the students and their IEPs. And it would certainly decrease the intense load that is on public schools, because, looking at this from a teacher's perspective, we do ask public schools to be everything to every child. And that's just not a realistic expectation. And so I think a public-private partnership, especially in the area of special needs, would be something very powerful.
Man, Chris, I'll just say I love that answer, Ellen. That was fantastic. We've been actually, most of my kids are at a private school right now, and I have one kid that's been in a school that has sort of, more tries to meet broader needs, smaller class size kind of thing. And my wife and I are saying we'd love for that school for our own school to be able to meet a wider array of needs. And to your point, that is one of the, frustrations that a public school system will say, well, we've got to meet, everybody's need. And that's certainly true. But and I think, Chris, to the question, there are ways that you can, if schools are willing to take some IEP kids, let's create incentives to take a broader socioeconomic group of kids. Let's, whatever, some factors where you show the public school look, we're trying to create a very broad, group of kids in our school too, and understand some of the pressures you're facing. Let's work on this together. I think, really to your point, if you could provide more positive incentives that everybody could look at and say, I got to admit, that sounds pretty good, or I feel like they're not just trying to meet some very small suburb, school need that feels that a public school teacher or group of folks might look at and say, well, that's easier to do. I think that's one way to build more creative partnering.
And I would add to what Alan said earlier today about leadership. I mean, that has been the key to anything really, anything innovative that has taken place, right? Parents have put a lot of pressure, but it has been some incredibly creative leadership coming from districts and charter schools that have allowed for some of these schools to really blossom and to partner in ways that we never thought possible.
It occurs to me that when I asked the question at the beginning, who could be against some of these things that seem like such common sense, empowering the parent, getting money directly to the people who make the best decisions, opening up pathways to opportunity, not shutting down any pathways to opportunity, because like every pathway to opportunity to me is like makes the country stronger. But when I say, it's only slightly rhetorical when I say, you know, well, who could be against this? I think I could come up with a short list of who could be against this, and I think you guys would all know them. But chief amongst those, I would say that public employee unions who are deeply vested in the current system as is have just, if we're being honest and logical, they just have a vested interest in actually the system remaining the way that it is, because they're literally vested in it. But I'm looking at some of you and I'm thinking it's occurring to me that, for instance, public employee unions, especially teachers unions, wouldn't be particularly strong in your areas, not like it would be in my state, for instance. Am I making too much of them as a political force in blocking the things that we want to happen for families?
From South Carolina's perspective, not at all. Although we don't have technically unions because there's no collective bargaining. There are very strong associations that are affiliated with the national unions that operate here. And, you know, from the perspective of a southern state that's predominantly rural, I mean, we have some major population centers, certainly. But a lot of times, lawmakers are sitting in districts in rural areas where the public school system is the largest employer in their area. And so that's real political pressure. So you have folks who in theory should be with you, but because of just the pragmatic politics of it, they aren't. So I don't think you're underestimating that at all, or overestimating, I mean.
Even if you don't have them, they still have affiliates. And even when they don't have affiliates as a strength, I live in a slightly rural area. We're not what you would consider to be a bastion of union, teachers union stuff, but you will put a charter school in our district over our superintendent's cold dead hand. And I can see why actually it is threatening. It's economically threatening, even if you're not part of a union or whatever. Still, I actually think the way for parents to win over the objections of maybe some of their elected leaders becomes our biggest hurdle. It becomes the thing that's hardest for us most on the ground. Any final words or final thoughts about helping arming parents to win the battle, to win to be heard, to be seen, to get the attention of the people that represent them, and ultimately to get the resources into their own families to be able to wrestle control of that so that they can educate their kids?
I'll jump in first. I think in order for people to take action, they have to be inspired, right? They have to be inspired to see the possibility. And we haven't really begun to do that broadly. So I would say a first step is inspire them to take action, allow them to see in some way what can be possible, but that would take for us to allow them to be at the table.
I'd say from my perspective, don't be afraid to fight the fight. You know that you're going to have setbacks. You're going to have good days and bad days. And we certainly had a bad day yesterday in South Carolina. But I think to the point I believe it was Jim made earlier, we know that they're going to come after us. We know that they're going to call us terrible names. But we're fighting for the right of children who are being failed in their education and ultimately in their life. By a system that is not keeping its promise of public education. And so, I mean, we're fighting for something that's worth fighting for, so don't be afraid of it.
Ellen, can I just ask you, what's the part two to that fight? You know, you had a bruising loss, and then, you know, what comes next? What's the part two? What's the second act of that?
Well, I think, you know, probably it's a legislative strategy. I think that the good thing that has come out of this is that lawmakers are seeing how energized parents are. Parents are finding their voices. And so I think our fiduciary responsibility as folks who are trying to work on behalf of these parents and to amplify their voices is just to continue to engage, inform, and empower those parents. And we're very blessed in South Carolina to have a governor who buys into that vision, who understands that vision, and who I think is willing to use his office and the platform that he has, the bully pulpit that he has to continue to amplify those parent stories and really make parents the face of this movement, parents and their needs of their students. So that's going to be our act too, is, you know, you have to change the political dynamic. Margaret Thatcher said, you win the argument and then you win the vote. So we're going to go out and win the argument.
Ooh, bringing Margaret Thatcher into the discussion. You go with your bad self, Ellen. Rob, Senator Bryan, how do we win?
Well, I mean, maybe I'll ask Ellen if we can trade governors for at least a few years, but you know, maybe I'll throw a different tack in. I think business leaders' involvement. Chris, you made the point earlier that you don't run anything else, or maybe Jim did. You don't run anything else the way we run our schools. You don't have this monopoly control, and I think business leaders, a lot of them, you know, they'll look at certain things and just understand you don't want to run it like a bureaucracy. But I think if they need to hear those stories, they need to get in those schools and see what's happening. Because if we have a number of business leaders start to, and I think the way Florida scholarships work with the tax credits is kind of interesting, because I think it actually does a good job of helping some of the businesses understand you know, what's going on in their educational community, and to think about it, and to think about wanting to see the same kinds of reforms. I mean, I always say part of the problem in education, you know, if we're running a business today and we say, gosh, the way we're hiring teachers or doing whatever doesn't, you know, or just like the way we're hiring factory workers, I mean, if we need to change that, you plan for that. You maybe even put money aside and you say, okay, we're going to transition this system. And it's really hard in the political world to do that. And so I think engaging more with business leaders, making them understand that we're working off a system that was built a long time ago, that probably made a lot of sense in certain ways when it was built, but it's not the system that works today. I mean, you know, 50 years ago, you could have gotten Crest or Colgate and that was it. Now you can get Sensodyne and you can get Fresh Breath toothpaste. You can get every kind of toothpaste under the sun. You're like, why do people keep creating? Because they keep creating new ones because you have a special thing you need for your teeth, right? And there's no reason that education can't meet a broad array of students' needs. And I think businesses understand that inherently. So I'd love to see more involvement of those leaders, because they can put pressure, to Ellen's point, on Republican leaders that maybe don't want to shake the boat in their area, or Democratic leaders in urban areas where there are a lot of big businesses where they can say, hey, you guys should be doing more school choice.
I love this point, and I love any way that we can make it safe for them to wade into these waters without fear. Jim, final word from you. And you didn't like it earlier when I said from a high level, but we're not going to pretend that you're not in a place that you have a big view of things. So,
thanks. Yeah. Look, I've enjoyed the conversation. I do want to pull out something Adriana said. We got to have parents at the table for these discussions. And the more we can do that, the better off we are, because it blunts the attack from that labor union that represents teachers.
Great place to stop. I see Jeannie Allen is back on again. Thank you so much, Jeannie, for the invite. Thank you to all of these champions for children and for families that are here with us today. I love you all. Jeannie, I love you because you are unapologetic about fighting for all of us and fighting for children, and you never take any shorts along the way. So I'm gonna get a t-shirt. It's gonna have your face on it. I'm gonna wear it in these things from, you know, whenever I need to be particularly powerful and strong about standing up for families and children. So thank you so much.
Very sweet, and thank you all. This has been such a pleasure listening and watching, and we're going to get a lot of mileage out of this over the next several weeks as we share it and market it around. I'll tell you, there's a couple of comments we didn't really get to about parents making the decision about schools in their communities, not in entire districts and zones and boroughs and cities. And we have to be resilient on that. Margaret Thatcher's calling, right, was you can't even act, though, unless you have information. And so I would not be myself if I didn't also be bold and advertise the Parent Power Index, which CER created recently, Go there, use it, go to your legislators like Rob Bryan or your federal people or the advocates like Adriana Ellen and say, help me turn this around, because information is power, and you guys are amazing. And Chris, you in particular, at getting that news out. So thanks for being with us. We will keep you apprised and hope to see you all again soon.